you get the process now? Let me talk to you through the process, just step by step, one more time. It's in your manuals. But now that we've talked about it in theory, now that you've actually seen it and experienced it in practice, we'll talk our way through it. The one thing we won't do is we won't actually practice it here because it's really not an appropriate thing to do. But hopefully, your experience of actually doing a regression with bouncing back and negotiating, you see it's the same stuff. You're just changing the emphasis a little bit. Does that make sense to you guys? So, the process is on page, where are we? 56, I believe. Yeah, 56. The other ones are just warm-up exercises. So on page 56, number 1, you, of course, start with H+. Let's have your attention. You start with H+. You get the state they're looking for in the general context, and maybe an outcome. But that'll be kind of happening anyway because you'll be doing the mind-bending stuff before. Did anyone see me induce trance? Get the boilerplates in? Did anyone see me get the emotion and regress on it? Right? Step 2 is orient fully. Did you all see me do that? Right? Bouncing back and orienting, that's the only bit I didn't do because it just went straight there, so there was no opportunity to do that. Dissociate back to adult. Did everyone hear that bit? 1, 2, 3 adult in the room. That's pretty tough, right? That's right after Lenny started tearing up. And that's kind of the relief. You need her to experience it a little bit so that they know it's happening and they know it's going to be released, and it's kind of like plugging into the problem. But then you want to bounce them out of it again because if you leave them there, it would just be cruel. You don't need to stay there any longer. Plus, the resources are in the adult, not in the child. Oh, sorry, 56 is the positive emotion. Let's just move on here. 62, you're quite right. I apologize to whoever had the right, recall the right version. So induce trance, orient fully, dissociate back to adult. Okay, now we reframe the adult, right? So typically, the adult will believe that it's normal to have this reaction. Why? Because they spend their lifetime justifying it themselves. It's a very common thing. So their beliefs will justify the experience so that they can rationalize it. A bit like you would justify the fear of cats because you're allergic to it, but which one caused the other, right? So you reframe the adult to let it know, hey, you know you're safe. You made it through, you lived, you've survived. Unless a corpse comes in and starts talking to you, that reframe will always work. If a corpse does come in and talk to you, then you have bigger issues at hand, all right? Other parts of that reframe that can work is, for example, you're bigger and taller and stronger now. It's true. You know, there's very few people who are the same height, same strength, and wisdom factor as they were at 8 years old. So you can forget that part, right? So now we create the moment of safety on either side. These two things here, right? So we had the bridge on the way to school, and we had the classroom with the teacher in it, right? Everyone clear so far? So before the event, after event. So it was actually a couple of minutes before, and maybe how long afterwards? 20 minutes? You see, I wrote the notes because I knew you were going to come here. It's actually relatively common. The experience where they're safe beforehand, it's just a few minutes because it's usually a shock that occurs, so it can be a few minutes ahead beforehand. And it tends to be like up to about half an hour afterwards maximum because it takes a certain amount of time for the experience to fade. And with kids especially, they have relatively short attention spans, so 15 to 20 minutes and a new block of life begins anyway. So it's a relatively common time, but it's not always the case. So then you explain to the adult this whole safety loop so that they know that they're not going to be thrown into the wolves again, that it's going to actually be okay. So they don't just start going, can't do this. Make sense? So when the adult knows it, we're going to actually go through the whole loop again, but this time without the child really knowing it's coming. Now, between you and I and the tape, you guys are home, the child, if you like the younger version of them, will at some level already know because it's you or it's them, right? It's the same person. But you don't want them to know yet because you won't put too much emphasis on the reframe. You want them to get the sensation that it's still a surprise, but it's reducing, the fear is reducing anyway. That's a great moment for them to realize that it's happening anyway without any magic or any changing. You want to keep it as close to reality. Well, this is really reality, right? it's what happens. They were safe, there was danger, they were safe. That's what really happened. And you may as well run them through that whole thing so that it matches reality as closely as possible, but it's also beginning the process of healing, right? So you get the child, the safety, you run it through all the way to the safety. Notice how the middle bit, the bit with all the accident, I kind of skip over that enough that something happens, but not so much that we re-traumatize, right? Some people will need a little bit more of it, some people a little bit less. It's a bit of a judgment call, but you don't have to make them suffer. You just let them have enough that know something's happening, and importantly, enough so they realize that the emotions are starting to drain away. That's a really important step. I mean, it was quite a surprise, wasn't it, the first time you ran the loop, to think, hang on a second. First it's like big shock, big fear, and now it's like tolerable, right? And that's what you want, that's what you're looking for. It's a very empowering realization for them to make. Now we go back to the adult, right? Now you prepare the adult for coaching the child. Now, some adults need less coaching than others. Lenny doesn't need much coaching because she gets this whole thing, so it's just a question of explain it and she can do it. Other people need a lot of hand-holding. If in doubt, so if they have, shall we say, a low emotional intelligence quotient, then you'll probably do a lot more hand-holding. You'll probably want them to speak out loud what they're saying so you can hear, to make sure that they're not really putting in some kind of messed up frames like, you know, you're going to be really scared, it's going to be awful, and the world's going to be never going to be the same again, right? That's not the kind of pep talk a child needs. But people do that, not because they're trying to be realistic. It's going to happen, right? What you want to make sure is that they give them the safety talk and really prepare them for the experience. And then, of course, the funny thing happens, which is the little girl goes, all right, I'm kind of a little nervous, but I'll do it because I want to get through this. Go ahead. The first loop is no pep talk. After the first loop, you do the pep talk to the kid. Exactly. So after the first loop, which is done purely just with the adult knowing what's going on, but the child doesn't, you give the child that talk. So we're on we're step 8 right now. Step 9, the adult coaches the child now, and it says, okay, here's what's going to happen in a moment. You know, you're standing on this bridge and everything's fine. But when you get over the other side of the bridge, it's going to be an accident, it's going to be a mess, and you're going to be scared. But I want you to know it's going to be fine. In a few minutes after that, you're going to run all the way to school, you'll walk into your classroom, your teacher's there, you're going to feel totally safe, and you'll make it, right? If you need more leverage, then talk about all the good things that are going to happen in their life afterwards. But this adds more leverage to the whole experience, so the child has more reason to get through it, to get to the goodies on the other side. It's like dangling the carrot or the sugar-coated stick, because it's a kid and they don't eat carrots. But you see where I'm going with this, right? Now you run the cycle. This is basically the cleanup process. Start in safety, run right through, you're safe. Adult, how was that? How was that? Great. How do you feel about her? Great. Let's do it again. Run through, come back. Adult, how was that? Great. How do you feel about her? Great. I want to know how the adult felt about the experience, because that's who's going to be left with it. And you want to have the first rationalization should come from the wiser part of them, the one with more life experiences. Then you ask them about how they feel about the child, because typically they'll be pretty proud of them, and it's like, this kid's good. And those feelings project onto that child, which goes into the next loop, which makes it even better. And that's part of the reasons that the child starts going like, oh, I'm curious about this now. Because part of those adult resources start slipping in because of the way the adult projects approval and happy vibes to the kid. Make sense? So how many cycles did we have to run? Not many. It was 2, maybe 3, right? I think I ran one more than I needed to, just because we could. Next. Now, the forgiveness thing, you can put at the beginning, like I did, the forgiveness thing you have to do at this stage, or you can do it after the reintegration. I ended up reintegrating her 3 times, if you noticed. Once after the first whole thing, because there's a lot of emotions there, so I thought I may as well bring it back. Then we did the forgiveness and reintegrated that, so that was part of the whole person. Then we did the second lot, which was the tension, and this time we waited for the forgiveness section to do reintegration, and that's partly because it wasn't such an emotional experience anymore. Make sense? So we had, and again, it just shows you can play with the structure a little bit to fit the context as you need to. Everyone cool with this? So next we come with the forgiveness stage. This is where we talk about, in this case we actually used love as the framework for forgiveness, but needn't be love if it's not appropriate. The point is that you're letting go of the person. The person is no longer important in their life. And sometimes I actually like the analogy, which I've given you guys a few times, about, crossing the road with fear and without. It just isn't necessary anymore. And the anger just isn't necessary anymore to protect the child because you survived. You're beyond that now. If the situation is ongoing, it's a different story, right? That's an ongoing situation. And then you have bigger things to deal with. But that's totally a different story. So you do it when it's appropriate. Now, realize this. There will be some clients who, no matter how much you try to explain to them the reframe and the benefits they'll get, they will not want to forgive. You cannot force them to. Does it make sense? It's got to be their choice. They'll probably still get quite a bit of benefit from releasing the, shall we say, the toxicity of the initial event in emotion. It may not be totally gone. There may still be something going on there. It might come back to a certain extent. It may not. Who knows? It's unpredictable. But it's not your choice. It's got to be theirs, right? Then reintegrate. I like the whole hugging metaphor because usually people got quite emotional by this stage. So you hug them, you bring them inside. And notice how I'm using counting through the ages with typical experiences to bring those experiences up with them. Now, if I bounce through a few experiences, I'll actually use those in the growing up process as things as reference points. Did you notice how I did that the second time? Because I had a reference point, a specific one, right? So if I had more of those reference points, I'll do more of those things. Simple as that. And then at the end, I just like to give them a big, juicy, hypnotic blitz about self-esteem, how you're a great person, how your life is going to improve, how you're doing really good stuff, and, well, you saw, you felt the result of that, right? So it basically takes everything you've done and really gives them a tremendous, crescendo ending so that, it's like the opera and then the singing happens and the crashing cymbals and the throwing of thunderbolts, and they walk out going, I am, someone special. Sorry, I forgot my metaphors. Okay, before we carry on, first of all, you guys having a good time learning stuff? Yeah. All right. It gets, I know, and I did warn you a little bit, it can get a little bit emotional when we do this sort of part of the day because that's really what we're dealing with, right? Here's the crazy part. Every part of the training, you end up going through the experience of the thing you're learning about. So during the blitz, you get to have like this huge animation thing going on because that's how people feel. During the mind-bending language, you totally space out because that's how people feel. During the regression part of the training, you get really emotional because that's how people feel. Are you kind of noticing this?